Hello, Mike. Thank you so much for being here today. And I just want to get started with a question about your background. Could you please tell us a bit about your early life or family and what it was like growing up?
Sure. I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I know you're very, very busy with your work, and this is something you do on the side, so I really appreciate that. As far as my background, I'm ethnically Chinese, but I was born in South Korea. My parents were there as well. What happened was my parents, like the typical immigrant, that they wanted a better life for their kids. My parents had a fairly successful life in South Korea, but again, they thought it'd be very challenging for my sister and I. And so they took the risk, had the American dream. They came to the United States, not speaking the language. They worked at restaurants, and eventually they saved up enough money to open up their own restaurants in the state of Michigan. And that's where I grew up and raised. I was in a restaurant family. Their dream was for my sister and I to go to the University of Michigan. We eventually both did that. And then after college, I went to work for General Electric. I worked in corporate finance for about 10 years. I worked in a couple different countries, all in finance for a few different GE businesses. And after 10 years, that's when I applied and joined the FBI.
That's a very unique upbringing. It will be interesting to know how such experiences influenced your later life decisions. So were there any pivotal moment in your life, like childhood or adolescence, that directed you towards the law enforcement?
You know, I don't have any one moment like some people do. And that's why they joined the FBI. Nothing really happened. What I would say is that throughout my life, growing up in the United States, the opportunities that we had, granted, it was through the hard work of my parents and their sacrifices, but still, it's the country of America and the United States that really gave us so much in that my family and I could never repay. And as you get older, when I was 30, I wanted to do something in my life that had a little bit more meaning to life versus just working in corporate finance. And my parents had just retired from their restaurant, so I didn't have to go back and help anymore. And so I really wanted to try to give back to the country that gave us so much and provided so many opportunities for my family.
Oh, that's very respectful, sir. How did you navigate your way to becoming a supervisory special agent?
Well, for me, I was an FBI agent for about 14 years before I applied and became a supervisory special agent. And I really enjoyed my time being an FBI special agent. I would say that my worst day in the FBI did not compare to my best day in the private sector. Every day when I was an agent, I came to work and it was just something that was so interesting, so fun to do. You're doing, on top of that, you're doing something worthwhile. There were so many days when I would say to my coworkers, I can't believe that we're getting paid to do this. It's just something that self-motivating, and you're just doing something good. You don't really think about that because it's fun, it's interesting. But eventually, you have to do something that would actually help to motivate and to help mentor younger agents as a more official role. And I wanted to have a little bit more input and more guidance on how things were doing for our squad. And so that's why I applied and became a FBI agent supervisor.
That's a very inspiring story. And I'm feeling truly proud for you, for the journey. So how have your family and your heritage influenced your career path and approach to your job?
I would say in some aspects, it was completely contradictory because, as you know, especially for an Asian immigrant, the dream is not to have your child join law enforcement. It's to become a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, something like that. And I can totally understand that. When you grow up and you see the sacrifices that your parents have made as an immigrant to the United States and working so hard. My parents worked 7 days a week. They worked minimum 12, 13, 14 hours a day. In the restaurant business, it's very, very tiring. And so everything that you do is guided by the fact that you have to not repay, but you have to make sure that all their sacrifices was worth it. And unfortunately, a lot of it, that means status and means financially worth it. And so that's why growing up, everything you do is very secure, is very safe. You take the safe route because, God forbid, you did something, a career change, or did something, and it was not financially rewarding or it didn't meet their expectation, then all their sacrifices would have been for waste. And so the Asian culture, they really don't see law enforcement in the same respect, in the same eyes as they would see engineering or becoming a doctor. For example, when I told my parents that I was going to become an FBI agent, I just graduated from the University of Chicago with my master's. And 4 months later, I'm telling my parents I'm going to become an FBI agent. And my mom's reaction was that of tears. My dad was of confusion because they were expecting me to continue working for General Electric or to go into consulting, which I would make a lot more money. So to tell them I was becoming an FBI agent, it was kind of shocking. So from that perspective, that presented a lot of challenges. I remember when my dad found out that I was going to be carrying a gun, he's like, "Aren't you going to be sitting behind a desk? Why do you need a gun for?" I was like, "Dad, that's what an FBI agent does." But fast forward, 17 years later, my dad is very proud of me. He wears an FBI cap that I got for him whenever he goes to Taiwan. And my mom's come around too, which is, for me, very rewarding. Because I remember 2 years after I joined the FBI, I was here in Las Vegas. My aunt was talking to my mom. My mom was still crying. And my aunt was saying, "It's okay. He'll go back to his corporate life, to his office desk." And my mom's still crying. And I'm sitting there. I'm like, first of all, I'm sitting here. I can hear you. I'm right here. And number two, I'm not going to go back. But what did carry forward with me is from the culture, my parents are very, very hardworking. And for me, that's what I brought into the FBI. It's just, a ethic to work hard. I don't believe that anything should be given to you. You should work hard for it, and that's what you get, is what you deserve. When we were working cases as a case agent, like I said, a lot of times I just never considered it a work. And so if we had to be called out at like anywhere from during the daytime or in the middle of the night, work all night, it was just something that I was happily willing to do because I didn't consider it work. It was something that we just did because we wanted to progress our cases. You wanted to help out another agent, just something that you did. And that's something that was taught to me by my parents, something that I carry forward. One thing that my dad always taught me, or he didn't officially teach me, but when I saw him in the restaurant, he would never ask one of his employees to do something that he was not willing to do himself. He tells a story about one business owner that he worked for was that if the owner saw something on the floor, he would rush over and tell a waiter to go pick it up. My dad was never like that. He was out there shoveling snow. He would be washing dishes, helping the dishwasher, everything like that. As a supervisory special agent, one of the perks we get is when your squad gets a newly assigned car, you get to keep that car. You decide who gets the new car. What I immediately did was I made sure that the senior agents on my squad that had more experience than I did, made sure that they had nicer cars than I did. And I learned that from my dad. And so when I told my dad that story, he just looked in the air. He's like, "Yes, that's the right thing to do." So that's the type of stuff that I learned from my parents about the work ethic and how to treat people.
It sounds your family and heritage seems to have had a major role in shaping your career. So with that in mind, could you detail your day-to-day duties as a supervisory special agent?
My day-to-day duties, there's only a few things that are day-to-day. Everything else is ad hoc and something comes up and you have to work with some people to get situations resolved. But my routine stuff that I have to do is, unfortunately, it sounds kind of boring. It's a lot of administrative approvals, signing off on this approval or that. Someone needs my signature, something like that, to get documents through. But on a day-to-day basis, like I said, everything changes. Resource planning, helping the agents in our squad get the information that they have produced to other squads so we can make cases, we can help other squads with their investigations. I have a few other different functions under my squad, and a lot of that is dealing with people and just helping people to try to be a little bit more productive, working with management to get their message through to our agents. And so the day-to-day stuff is not as interesting as what people would like. As an FBI supervisor, I don't really worry about kicking down doors and like that. Most of my stuff is worrying about paper cuts because it's very dry in Las Vegas and things like that. So unfortunately, day-to-day is a bit more boring than what people would want to think.
But I still believe it's very multifaceted and dynamic.
Yeah, the FBI is always a dynamic environment, especially today, in today's world in which law enforcement is not as highly regarded as it used to be. And so there are some challenges with that. But again, as long as we understand that where the FBI mission is, we're here to do good. And everybody in the FBI that I've met, the utmost of character, and we always strive to do what we think is right. And so from that perspective, it just makes things a lot easier.
Within the journey, can you share a rewarding moment from your career where you felt like you made a significant impact?
There were 2 times when I would say that I was very, very happy and I realized I was in the right place. Right after October 1st, the mass shooting, we came upon some information that there was a person who was going to come to Las Vegas and he was going to conduct another mass shooting as well. He was coming after his wife and he was going to shoot up a casino where she worked at. He said that he had done a dry run, had looked at security guards at casinos, various casinos that he thought that she worked at. He actually drove all the way out here to see if and when he would be pulled over. He identified weapons that security guards were carrying. He texted her pictures of weapons that he had, knives and guns and whatnot. So I worked with an agent, guy who happened to be in Cleveland, worked with that agent, did something like 18 or 19 interviews. And a lot of these interviews were over the phone. And because this was an Asian target, a Chinese target, he spoke a lot of Chinese. And because there's a lot of the people from China in the Asian community have an inherent distrust for law enforcement. And I understood that. And because I understood that and the way that I talked to them, I was able to kind of alleviate some of those fears with talking with law enforcement. But in that span of 2 weeks, we went through all the interviews. And eventually we were able to get enough information to get a indictment, a complaint on the guy. First, he was arrested under separate charges, under local charges. And then he was transferred to our custody. And then that was under a complaint. And I remember on a Sunday when the FBI agent and he was arrested on a Friday on state and local charges. The FBI agent worked through the weekend. I was providing him information. And on a Sunday at around 2:30 was when we wrapped up the complaint. And I remember sitting at my counter at home on a stool and just thinking, wow, whether or not that guy would have actually come here and done the shooting, it just made me so proud. It was my own little moment. And it just felt like I had accomplished something and it made whatever I gave up in the private sector, my graduate degree, any family issues, it just made that moment really worth it. And I was just so proud. And I hate to say I was proud of myself, but it just was a really feel-good moment. And I remember just looking down at the ground and just be like, it was a good day. And it was on a Sunday, and all Sundays are good days, but it was an extra good day for me.